What the fuck is going on? Wait. Let me backtrack. Welcome to a brand new episode For the Love of Humankind, and as always, I am your host, Jeff. And let me tell you, the world is in fucking shambles. As if we didn't already know that was happening. I'm literally trying to figure out what is actually happening in this world. Because we have had a lot of interesting things take place over the last couple of weeks. And I kind of want to talk about them. Because if you are anywhere on TikTok, anywhere on social media, you are probably seeing these things and asking questions. Most of the things you're probably like, well, shit, here we go. This is the end. Well, we have been in the end game for a while now. And all of these things that have been taking place, they've been happening. Why are we just now learning about these things or talking about these things? So I literally have a list of things that I have been like seeing and looking at on TikTok and other social medias and news outlets and like wondering why some of these things are getting more coverage while others aren't. Right. So the first thing, we have had multiple earthquakes that have taken place in Turkey and Syria over the last couple of weeks. We get it, like tectonic plates, they shift. But these are typically two areas that have not seen a lot of movement. And, you know, I think that there are things that contribute to that, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on in this podcast. But the fact that there are literal fractures in the fault lines in Turkey that you can visibly see blows my mind, because some of these fault lines are like 60 feet deep and like 40 feet wide, according to some reports. And so we are literally seeing these fault lines just like take countries and just separate them, which is actually wild, because one of the other things that's taking place that not a lot of people are talking about is there is actually a new ocean in progress of being formed, which is what? Yeah, so there is actually a new ocean that is being formed in Africa. In Africa, the east side of the continent is actually starting to split off because of earthquakes, because of tectonic plates shifting. And so it's starting, you know, here's my representation of Africa right here, right? It is starting to split on this side of Africa, and it's going to start forming an ocean. So like Africa is about to be split into like 2 to 3 different parts at this point. What? Like what? Huh? That whatever. Make it make sense. I don't know. The world is weird. But I talk about these things because scientists have claimed that the core of the Earth has actually stopped spinning, and it is going to start spinning in reverse, which is like, how does that, how does that make sense? I don't know a lot about science, but for like the Earth to like be spinning the same way for so many years, and then all of a sudden just like stop and like begin spinning the other way, like what is that going to do to the Earth? Our Earth is already imploding from everywhere, from capitalist to global warming to everything else in between. But what does that do? Like, what happens now? And again, I'm no scientist. I don't know anything about a lot of stuff, and I'm not a professional. But how do you judge that? Like, oh yeah, like the core just stopped spinning. And now it's going to go in reverse. Like, to me, that sounds like there was a bigger issue at play that we're not talking about. Because we were so focused on talking about everything else that, like, the core not spinning. It's just like, oh, that's fine. Everything's fine. Is it? Is it? Because I'm wondering what happens now. I have no idea. The other thing that we're seeing, UFO sightings, not only in the U.S., but also in Japan. There are these balloons and other random UFOs that are like casually appearing in random places. And the U.S. is out here spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to shoot off one missile to blow these things up. Some which are claimed to be Chinese spy balloons. Others that are like, oh, these could just be hobby projects, or these could just be things to calculate weather. These are also objects that are owned by private businesses to collect data. Like, first of all, what? Like, excuse me? Like, I don't know why we're spending money focusing on things that are, like, floating in the air. First of all, like, we shouldn't be spending money on that shit anyway. But balloons are, like, we're spending our resources on that instead of, like, providing housing or food for people that don't have food or housing. Okay, capitalist. The fuck is happening? Also, in Japan, people are like, oh, there's a UFO, and then they bring it to shore and it's a buoy. Like, why are we at a point in, like, society where we are assuming the worst in everything, right? Granted, a lot of things are terrible, and a lot of things have been terrible, but are we just assuming that everything is, like, a danger to ourselves? The answer is yes. Obviously, it has been a little over a year since Russia has invaded Ukraine, and that war has been happening, right? So that has a lot of countries, I'm assuming, kind of just like on their tiptoes, trying to figure out like what's next, right? Russia has a lot of access to nuclear arms, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. The U.S. has now pulled out of supplying weapons to Ukraine. There are some things happening there, but also like Russia pulled out of the treaty with the U.S. of not using nuclear arms, which is like kind of terrifying. And yet I'm expected to go to work every day. Cool. The priorities, I guess. So yeah, like these things are happening. There are apparently aliens in Australia. Like people are just like casually seeing aliens hanging out down under, just like chilling, just waiting for the world to just implode, because that's probably what's gonna happen. We're just, all of us are just gonna take each other out. I mean, we've been doing that for what, thousands of years, so like I guess it makes sense. And here comes Ollie with his squeaky toys. We love that. But yeah, so like people in Australia are just like casually catching outwardly beings on TikTok, and people are like, oh, it's related to the UFOs, but the UFOs, like, from what we know, aren't outworldly. But the government was also like, oh yeah, we're not going to count out, educated species outside of the Earth as being the cause of these things. Okay. What? There's something going on. There's something bigger at play here. And I think a lot of these things are distractions for what is actually taking place. And I brought this up to one of my buddies, and he was like, listen, they're not UFOs. The capitalist agenda, which, true, they are, 100%. But, like, we know that there are, like, educated species outside of this planet. So anything's possible these days. But here I am with my conspiracy theorist mind at times. Just living the dream. Living the dream. Other things that have taken place. We obviously had an Ohio train derail, which basically flipped, and vinyl chloride just filled the atmosphere. They were like, oh, let's just destroy these containers in a trench around this town in Ohio that is containing vinyl chloride, which is an extremely toxic chemical, to just like go in the air and then cause acid rain, which just is going to impact everybody. Like, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't like Ohio, but like that just doesn't make sense to just burn these things so it like floats in the atmosphere, and then here it comes down, impacts water, impacts the lives of everybody that lives in that town in East Palestine, Ohio. Here we are. We also had other similar train derailments in Texas, South Carolina, Arizona, like all of these within a couple weeks of each other. And we're not talking about these things. Or else we are talking about these things, but a little bit too late. The interesting thing, in 2022, so last year, there were actually 277 train derailments that took place across the U.S. How many of those did I hear about? None. None. Like, we have been using trains for a long time. These are things that happen every year and have continually happened every year, but like they don't get coverage. Why? Who knows? Trying to cover it up, or we talk about the harm that they're doing to ecosystems, because that would be a terrible look for the U.S. and we don't want that to happen. So cool things: trains derailing, harmful chemicals entering the atmosphere, causing residents of towns to be sick because of these things, but yet they're fine. They can live in that area, and we're not even going to test it. Great. We casually have these green lights that have appeared over Hawaii, which, according to some individuals, were caused from some of these UFOs that have taken place and have been shot down from different areas across the U.S. But I did happen to find out what these green lights actually were, and they were actually tracking greenhouse gases and pollutants over Hawaii, which is kind of cool, but also at the same time, like, what are they about to find, right? Like, we know global warming is a very heavy precedent in the world, and I think that's just going to add to our inevitable decline of where we are actually at in the world, and how terrible our case actually is. So, green lights over Hawaii, nothing to be scared about. They're tracking greenhouse gases and pollutants. And in Hawaii, of all places, is kind of interesting to me, being so like just off the shore of the U.S., where we see obviously a lot of those taking place, unfortunately, in the world. We had a cyclone in New Zealand, which has left plenty of individuals dead, unfortunately, but has caused a major impact in that part of the world. And so cyclones, all of these weather events, right, interesting that all of these things are taking place around similar times. Again, core stopping, global warming, all of these things are to cause for these incidents taking place. Going back to the train derailments, right? A capitalistic society being the cause of some of these things based on railroad workers and their union telling individuals that some of these railways are not safe to be used, or the transportation of certain items are not safe to be transported the way that they are. Yet nobody is listening to these unions, and when these things happen, who's to blame? It's going to fall back on the workers, but they are the ones that have been advocating for what they know to be true. And here we are. Things are still taking place because we are also in a country that doesn't listen to common folk. Common folk. It's great. It's great. Also in the U.S., so this was a statistic as of 2 weeks ago. We have already had 67 mass shootings in the U.S., and a mass shooting constitutes 4 or more individuals that have been killed or injured in that shooting. This follows the shooting at Michigan State University, where 3 individuals were killed and 5 were wounded. 4 individuals lost their lives, including the active shooter themselves, who had no connection to the university themselves. Again, what are we doing with gun control? Nothing. It's all about money, folks. Pay attention. The other thing that is interesting that is taking place, there is a fungi that is apparently two mutations away from literally taking everybody out in the world. Okay, super exciting, super terrifying. Yet again, I still have to go to work, but we love that. All of these things that are taking place that are not getting significant amount of coverage unless you are actively seeking it out. Again, going back to the shootings at Michigan State, one of the things that society has done and news media has done, and has been extremely frustrating as of late, especially for me, is that we are talking about these horrific incidents taking place. And we talk about it that first day, we talk about it the day after, and then 2, 3, 4, 5 plus days later, nothing. Like, why are we moving on so quickly from these horrific things that are taking place? Why? Well, I'll tell you, because there are horrific things happening every single day. And in a society where we have access to so much information and we have access to so many things, individuals cannot process all of these things that are taking place. Truly. I mean, we saw that with George Floyd, right? Like, we are now in a time period where you can see tragedy happen over and over because it will be documented, and you can see that video or hear that audio over and over on social media. And that causes a lot of trauma for people. That causes a lot of mental health issues with people, and yet we still don't have quality resources or funding for those resources for individuals. Why? I don't think I need to answer that any more than what I already have. The other thing that this isn't new news, but all of these things are adding to it. And I think that this is going to continue to go down. The last time that we had a conversation about the doomsday clock, which, if you are unfamiliar with the doomsday clock, is a focal point on nuclear disaster. And when irreparable harm reaches a point of there is no going back from being able to save or being able to protect the things that are taking place in our world, specifically when it comes to economy and when it comes down to climate change and things like that. Like, nuclear warfare is going to impact the climate more than anybody probably even knows. And so the last time we heard that, we were 90 seconds to doomsday, which is the lowest that it's been in its history. And all of these things that are taking place are just adding to that doomsday clock. This treaty, again, that Russia was like, oh no, we're not going to be a part of this treaty anymore. They're also like, yeah, we're going to continue this war with Ukraine. And they also said, oh yeah, so if the U.S. does this, like, we're using nuclear warfare. Great. We're all in great hands. Yet, the 1% is chilling. 1% is not paying taxes. The 1% still thinks there are things that are viable to save us all. And they have nothing to do with that. Awesome. Great. We need to mobilize, people. We need to strategize. We need to talk about this shit because we got to figure out what is happening and we got to act fast. We do not have much time left. Aside from that, being in the state of Florida, living in Florida now, I don't want to say privy to what's taking place, but I'm focusing more on the government that is and the decisions that are happening in Florida. Lots of conversation about ending talks about and education around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Basically, getting rid of any pedagogy that is taught in any institution in the state of Florida. Anything related to drag queens, gender, we're just going to wipe it all out. In a state, mind you, that had a mass shooting several years ago at a nightclub in Orlando that was home to a lot of LGBTQ plus individuals that they found safety. Okay. Also in those bills, for whatever reason, we're talking about how the fuck do we get rid of anybody that's not white and not a nationalist. We are also going to pass a bill that does not allow dogs to hang their heads out of windows, car windows to be exact, because that is important to the livelihood of anybody that lives in the state of Florida. I don't know what is happening, and I'm sitting here, podcast, sponsored by White Claw, not really, not knowing what is happening, because I cannot process all of these things. The one thing I do know is we cannot just sit around anymore. We cannot sit here and just let ignorant individuals make decisions for everybody. Find people to mobilize with. Find people to fight for what actually needs to be fought for. You're not going to do this alone. We're not going to do this alone. We're not alone. There are a lot of people fighting these fights, and they need numbers. Now is the time to make a stand and take a stand and fight for the things that are going to improve our livelihood. We can't just sit around anymore. And I know some of these topics and some of these things that have been taking place can be comical when it comes to UFOs or aliens. But at the end of the day, all of these things are related to capitalism, are related to people with money and just throwing money out the window. It's time for us to take a stand. I'm going to be providing resources in the description of this podcast video down below of ways for you to get connected, ways for you to find groups that you can connect with, to start these fights with, or continue these fights with, because these fights have been going on for some time. And those will be provided down below. We're not in a time that you can just call yourself non-political anymore. This is about our livelihood as individuals. This is about our ability to be able to speak freely and to be able to think for ourselves. Simple as that. And so I encourage you to get involved in any way that you can. If you found this video at all helpful, click that like button, that subscribe button. We got plenty of big podcasts coming this way. This has been For the Love of Humankind. And as always, I am Jeff, and we will see you next time.